Hello, everyone, and welcome to Health Law Talk presented by Shahardy Sherman Williams. Before we get started, please be sure to subscribe to our podcast and follow us on Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, and YouTube, linked in the description below. We hope you enjoy this episode.
And good morning, everyone. Shahardy Sherman Williams here in the studio. Conrad Meyer and Roy Bellina.
Good morning, everyone.
How you doing, Roy?
Doing well. Happy Friday.
Well, yes, if you're listening to this, we are on a Friday because we usually try to record on Friday mornings.
Right, and release it the following week.
That's right. So it is a good Friday morning here in the not the CBD, but the New Orleans and Metairie, Louisiana, overlooking the lake, the Foggy Lake. So I'm happy to be here.
Me too. Interesting topic today.
Very interesting. One that you and I have talked about and I think is very prevalent today, social media. And specifically social media and healthcare, the risks, the benefits, some of the pitfalls that I think healthcare providers or even entities, companies face when engaging the public through social media outlets.
Yep. Yeah, I think that like everyone is aware of social media, the benefits of it, the pros and cons. But when you bring it into the healthcare industry, there's a lot more things that practices need to consider, issues that they'll face. Obviously, there's benefits to it, but there could be some hurdles or things that they trip over, and so we're here to talk about those today.
Yeah, and today, I mean, you have to have it. I mean,
right.
if you're a provider, a practice, if you're an entity, a hospital, doesn't matter.
Sure.
I mean, to engage today, you have to have some sort of social media.
And I think everyone is pretty much accustomed to that now for, I want to say almost every industry, where if you get a referral or recommendation, whether it be for a roofer or somewhere to get your car repaired, or hey, my back hurts, who do y'all recommend I see? Oh, they're going to say, let's go see Dr. Conrad. Well, the first thing someone's probably going to do is they're going to Google you, and they're going to see, where is he? Where did he go to school? Does he have any reviews? Are there any pictures of him? And all that is their social media pages, and all of that kind of lends into the decision you're going to make. I mean, for me personally, if I could find information on someone and I see, okay, they look relatable, they've got good reviews, that they have a website presence, I'm more likely to choose that person compared to someone who has nothing, and I don't know anything about them until they walk into the exam room.
And you make good points. So we're going to talk about that a little bit, about reviews and having that, and what's a review and how is it really a review? Is it just somebody, a paid actor, or is it a ghost review, or is it truly someone who actually saw the doctor, for example, and made an accurate review of the professional medical services that provider rendered?
Right.
And so all those things are very important. I mean, and today, I mean, Roy, how many social media outlets do we have? I mean, Facebook, YouTube,
yep.
what we got? LinkedIn.
LinkedIn's a big one. I know there's some just for the medical profession,
Twitter. I mean, I forgot Twitter.
Yep. I mean, they're continuing to grow.
Is Instagram a social media?
Yep. That's under the Facebook umbrella.
TikTok? Would you consider TikTok a social?
There's a lot of providers on TikTok, I know.
Really?
Yep.
Okay, I did not know that.
Yep, they're on there.
Wow.
There's new social media avenues being invented all the time, and I think it's important for our providers and clients to consider, should they be on it, should they not be on it? Where do you cross the line between promoting your business and showing that you're relatable and in the 21st century versus, okay, this is too much and we need to pull it back in.
And see, this is such a big topic.
Sure.
It's a big topic because it's a big choice and a decision for a provider or an entity or facility to or a system, right, to jump into the social media fray.
Right.
So we're going to break this whole podcast up into maybe a couple of parts.
Sure.
So we'll talk about that in some future parts about how we break this down.
And I think that's a good way to start, because I'll get calls, and I'm sure you do as well, just the kind of generic one, or someone will call me and say, look, XYZ practice, we have a website with our, who the doctors are, what the office looks like, contact information, insurance we take, that kind of thing. But, should we get a Facebook page? Should we post pictures on Instagram? So, those initial questions that I receive kind of starts the conversation with the client or the practice on, all right, let's talk about this. Let's talk about what kind of practice you are, what kind of patients you're seeing, and then once they make the decision, okay, we're going to do this, well, who's going to have control over it? Is there going to be some sort of sign off where you have a medical director or someone in charge of your social media making sure you're not getting the face of a patient in the background that didn't consent to being on these pages? I mean, there's so many things that kind of go into this. It's really important for practices, if they haven't already, to kind of make a really good outline or a policy when they get started. Here's the app, here's the social media networks we're going to be on, and how we're going to proceed with that. So what are some of the, let's say we get the walk through the example of a practice that wants to have a Facebook or an Instagram page. Instagram's predominantly pictures. Facebook is obviously pictures and text. What's something that you typically tell people when they start off on kind of the big do's and don'ts of posting things online to the general public where you don't have a true provider-patient relationship?
Well, I guess the first thing that we're thinking about, what are the benefits, right?
Right.
What are the benefits? What are you trying to get out to patients, to the public at large? What are you trying to do? So there's so many things that you can do from just general networking, right?
And I think that's what it is. It's networking. I think it's
it is. It is networking, but it could be a lot more than that too. Education,
right?
You can educate patients on certain procedures, certain diseases, certain for COVID even,
sure.
right? I mean,
sure.
how many websites have you walked and seen COVID on every healthcare website?
Right. Or I think patients like to see, this is what this procedure looks like, or here's a doctor doing a 30-second video on explaining this. I think you're right. I think that's a good question to ask. What are going to be the benefits? What do you plan to use this for?
And I think in addition, I think every organization or every provider wants to promote themselves.
Correct.
They all want to get out there and they want to get penetration in the market and one of the ways today, like you correctly mentioned, is the digital presence.
Right.
So that can deal about how they handle patient care.
Right.
That could be patient education on certain things. It could be public health programs. It could be a lot of different things. And so that was I would frame the question as, what do you want to do? Like in your vision,
right?
Within the mission and vision of your company, your entity, what is it that you want to do? And start the ball rolling there.
Yeah, and I think the most popular answer that I've received, or that you would hear, is that people want to show patients and promote their business. What their clinic looks like, what the operating room looks like, or kind of here's a little snippet of what this procedure looks like. So I think it's education, and honestly, I think a lot of them are going to say, "Oh, well, my competitor ABC is doing this, and I want to do it too."
Yeah,
and so that's when we go into the aspect of all right, well, let's look at that and let's see, are they doing it correctly? Should they be doing it? If they shouldn't be, we'll tell you what you should do or shouldn't do, and go from there.
Well, you just don't want to fly off, just do some sort of knee-jerk reaction and
sure.
have someone in your organization just throw up a Facebook page or a
sure.
Twitter account. I think it needs to be a directed, calculated, formal approach,
right.
so that everyone in the organization knows what's going on. This is where the policy comes in.
And having someone really in charge to kind of review everything before you hit publish, or before you
That's a great idea. I mean, a point person that's in charge, maybe it's a marketing person or
sure.
someone else that's in charge of those accounts, so that you don't have,
mm-hmm.
Sweet Sue Nurse or, Dr. John Smith or whoever, Administrator John Doe,
right.
just, haphazardly getting on the Facebook site and just posting something willy-nilly.
And that kind of lends to typically where the conversation goes next. When we say, okay, we're going to do this. You're going to make a Facebook or an Instagram page for your practice. Now we need to talk about PHI and what you can and can't post. And it's very important that whoever's in charge knows the difference between, what's protected information, what's not. And I think
True.
and I think that is something where you have to go into examples and discuss, okay, are we going to get patient consents to be posted? And being very careful when you take a picture. Is a medical record in the background? Is the computer screen readable in the background?
Right.
Are there patient files on the shelf that you could see? Those are some things that you don't think about, but I think we all know this. There's people online that will not hesitate if they see a picture on Instagram of you. Let's say an example of a doctor sitting behind his desk in his office and he's explaining what a knee scope procedure entails. Someone might take that picture and zoom in as much as possible and see, oh, look, there's Rory Bellina. He must be a patient over there. Well, technically, that's a reach right there, because no one knew that I was a patient of this doctor, but he posted a picture of my medical record, or at least the outside of it, on social media without my permission.
True. And let me tell you something. You'd be amazed. You'd be amazed at the amount of people in healthcare,
Sure.
even, that really don't follow, I would think, not only HIPAA guidelines, but it's common sense.
Right. Right.
You know, I mean, I'll give you an example. I mean, years ago, this is years ago, but there were some nurses that were, brought up for photographing pictures of patients in the ER.
I think I do remember this, when they were unconscious.
They were unconscious, and it was on the news.
Yep.
It was all over the news. And you think to yourself, how in the world could someone do that?
Right.
Like, if you're a nurse and this patient is in his or her most vulnerable state,
right,
and they posted a picture of someone and then arguably made fun of that person,
right,
you almost like that goes beyond all common sense. But the sad thing is, it happens.
Yeah. Yep.
It happens, and it happens a lot more along those lines. People just do it because they think it's funny.
It does.
They don't realize the consequences. I can tell you right now. I know the nursing board got involved. I can't imagine any of those nurses would be laughing when the board got involved.
Right. No, and I think that's another kind of pivot to this.
Right.
We talked about a practice starting and having social media pages, but I think it's also important for practices to have a policy in place for their employees when they're on site. Are you going to allow your nursing staff or your administrative staff to make a TikTok while they're at the office?
And that could be in the form of a mobile phone policy.
Yeah, and I think those are very important because, like you said, the person, it could be whoever it may be, but that person could take a photo or make a video, not really realize what's going on, and in the background is the huge metal filing cabinets of all the patient records, or their computer screen's unlocked and there's a medical note popped up. And those are things that you don't think about, but someone's going to freeze that video and be curious and zoom in and say, oh, look, Rory Bellina was in there today for this test or this exam or whatever it may be, and post that online, or say, hey, look, Rory, your information's in the background on this, and tag me in the picture, something like that.
So, and I agree with that. So that comes to the next point of formulating sort of your practices and the facility's social media policy and what that entails. Not just the site, right? But your mobile phone policy, maybe your iPad or laptop, whatever computer you're using, policy,
sure,
right, within your group practice, your solo practice, your entity, your facility, whatever it is.
Sure.
That needs to be in consideration so that you don't have those kinds of issues. And you're not going to have someone raise their hand and say, well, I just didn't know.
Right. And I think the big thing is having controls, limiting who is allowed to post on behalf of the practice or the entity, really having controls on that to make sure that it's not
who responds.
And you're not,
so if someone responds to something on a post, right, there's got to be who responds to that comment or that issue if the response is required.
And I think that's another topic that we should definitely discuss is let's talk about responses and online reviews, because I know that I've received phone calls, and I'm sure you have as well, and it's tough, but you get a phone call from a practice saying, hey, I've got this patient, Conrad Meyer, who just left a nasty Google review, 1 star for me, said I did a terrible job on this knee scope of his, and it's bringing down my Google ratings, and it's right at the top now, and other people are commenting about it, and I think I did a great job, and my notes are completely contradicting what he's saying. I want to go defend myself. I want to post pictures of the x-ray showing it was a perfect scope, and I want to respond back to this. What do you tell that provider?
Well, the first question is take a breath.
Absolutely.
Let's see. I know this is disparaging. I get it. I understand your problem. The first thing we want to look at is the post that was put on whatever review, Health Grades, Google, doesn't matter, Facebook, Twitter. Is it factually accurate?
Right.
Because then we're talking about defamation.
Right.
And we're talking about, because if you're going to pursue this, then we need to show that this is a defamatory statement.
Right.
And so that's the first thing.
And let's say it's a gray post. For this conversation, let's just say it says, Dr. Conrad or Dr. So-and-so has bad bedside manner. They were rude, and I wouldn't recommend that to anyone. Kind of something that's very subjective. How do you advise someone if they get a very subjective post?
That's a really good question, and it's something that happens a lot.
I think so too.
And the answer is my first suggestion: if it's not if it's sort of that gray area, like you just mentioned, sort of this innocuous post of
Sure.
the doctor really just was rude to me,
Right.
and I just don't like him, like an opinion post.
Right.
The first thing I would say is, have you talked to the patient?
Absolutely. That I was about to cut you off, because that was going to be the first thing.
The first thing that
I said is
right.
first of all, what really happened, and have you talked to the patient?
Reach out to the patient and do so in a very professional manner, because a lot of times, and I teach this to the residents at here at LSU in Tulane when I do the Med-Mal seminar with them, and basically the largest complaint that I see in professional liability cases, and even to your point on the gray area response of he was rude, is that patients who have bad experiences, normally it's all about communication, or the
Right.
lack of communication between the provider and the patient.
Right. Right. And so, there's that lack of communication. And I think that's the part that, like you said, upsets a patient enough to where I think the patient's instant response is, well, what can I do to get back at this person? Or how can I make an impact? So I'm going to go post something negative online about them, and there's kind of no recourse or no repercussions. So, I get that phone call, and like you said, the first thing is, what happened, and have you talked to the patient? Sometimes a phone call to, hey, listen, Conrad, I saw that you posted this on Google. I just want to talk about it. I was really behind that day on notes, or I was preoccupied with this. Just a simple apology. And that might be enough for where they say, thank you for calling. I'm going to go take the post down. I'm glad we could work this out. I was just really upset in the moment, and I just kind of fired it away when I was walking to my car from my phone.
See, I think patients need to see that from doctors.
Absolutely.
And they don't see it enough. I think when you look at the personalities and the education, the time these physicians spend attaining their degree, residency, fellowship, specialty. I mean, when you look at all that, there's sometimes, a lot of times, a disconnect.
Sure.
And so what I tell the residents,
and they're under so much pressure
they
to
are.
get in and get out and have that patient encounter in 6 minutes and 13 seconds, or else they're going to be behind their whole day and they're not meeting their numbers.
Totally understand that, and I get that. The issue, what I tell the residents, and I think it's a really good thing, is imagine the patient was a family member.
Sure.
Your mom, your dad, your wife, your spouse, your kids, your grandparent, whatever. Remember, a family member. And if that patient is a family member, what would you want them to know? Mm-hmm.
Compared to
just somebody who just you don't even know, right?
Right.
So, and then I could tell you, a lot of times they'll switch back and they'll say, that perspective changes things for me. Because I know if it was my family member, I'd spend a lot more time. I would go into a lot more detail, or I'd change things. That's one thing to do. And then the other thing is, I tell them, just talk on the level. In other words, we always hear, legalese, right? Don't be
Right.
legalese. Talk
Right.
to us straight. So when I tell physicians, I say, look, cut through the medical jargon and talk to them straight. Talk to them straight. Say, hey, here's what's going to happen, guys.
Right.
Here's what's going on. And so I think when people feel the connection and the building of rapport,
Right.
not this, like you mentioned, this sort of drive-through healthcare mentality.
Sure.
Get them in, get them out quick,
And I think one thing
I think it helps.
that's tough for physicians or various providers is a lot of times they're just afraid to apologize. They're afraid if I say, look, I had a terrible day, or look, I messed this up. We should have handled it this way. They're terrified of the M word, of the malpractice word.
That's defensive medicine. They don't want to do that.
Right.
Because then all of a sudden they feel like they've opened the door.
Yeah. And he said he's sorry, he messed up. And maybe the patient's recording that in his pocket and is going to bring that to his attorney. That puts up this wall between patients, and that could lead to some of these negative reviews or these issues.
True, but I will tell you this. Louisiana, for example, has the I'm sorry law. And basically it allows providers to, send either verbally or in writing remorse or humility, and if say there was an adverse outcome, they can do that. And that expression of remorse, or I'm sorry, or I apologize, this didn't go the way we planned, that confession or apology, whatever you want to call it,
right.
Is not admissible in a civil action. Okay, so I tell them that. So that way, feel free to do that.
Sure.
That should cut the tie that
Sure.
you think it's defensive and you have to protect yourself.
Sure.
And we're not the only state that does that. They have many states that have I'm sorry laws in it,
Right.
to allow the transparency and let providers make that expression
Sure.
of remorse to patients.
So let's take another step further. We've got a patient who leaves kind of that subjective review of, Dr. Conrad wasn't nice to me, or he messed this up, and the doctor really wants to defend himself, and we talked about talking to the
Right.
patient. Talking to the patient didn't work, or that's it's not a viable option for
Sure.
whatever reason it may be. So, what are some options? I definitely don't want the doctor going on Facebook or social media and saying, no, I did that procedure correct, and here's why he's wrong, for a myriad of reasons. But, what are some things that you've seen where you see these online reviews and the best practice for kind of responding to them or various social media?
Okay, so, and I've run across this numerous times. So this is the problem. The first thing you have to look at, and how many of us have done this, is look at the terms of service.
Right.
And so you go to Facebook, Twitter, and you look at the terms of service, which, I mean, how often have you actually read, Rory, in any app, anything where they have the
Sure.
TOS, that long document
Sure.
that comes out? How many times y'all just scroll down and hit agree when you haven't read this massive legal contract?
Right. Hardly ever.
Right. So
Right.
nobody has a clue what that is. So in other words, there might be some method in the terms of service that would allow someone to contact a social media company
Right.
and say, look, under the terms of service, this post is not accurate.
Right.
And it is disparaging, and we're going to ask you to remove it. So if the patient doesn't remove it for whatever reason, maybe there's something in the terms of service, a TOS,
Yep.
that might be a violation that the social media company would remove it, or you can ask them to remove
Sure.
it, maybe by providing information that shows the post is inaccurate or incorrect.
But are you allowed to do that?
Well, I think it depends on what you're able to do. In other words, you can't submit PHI.
Right.
Right. So you have to be very careful in how you craft, if you're going to take that route, what you're going to say, how you're going to say it, because you don't want to inadvertently release
Right.
the PHI.
And I think what you're discussing is what most people know is, reporting a post. So I report this
Right.
post as spam or phishing or inaccurate or.
But if you have read the TOS, and if there's something in there that can help you, I think it's best to
Sure.
use that in the reporting of misinformation.
So what about the practice that, has these various social media pages, and you think a competitor or some sort of bot is out there trying to just plummet their page, leave as many 1-star Google reviews as they can, or post comments and it's not a real patient, it's an account that was created minutes ago. I think that's becoming a problem for different providers. I know it's an issue a little bit in the legal world, at least it's been here recently,
Right.
where you've got competitors that are trying to drive down really your page on a search result. If you're searching for orthopedic surgeon New Orleans, and Conrad, you want to be at the top of that. But if
Right.
you've got a lot of issues going on, or someone could go in there and leave as many negative reviews as possible, so your ranking is going to be low on whatever site you're using to search and sort by highest to lowest doctor.
Now, interestingly, they have services out there that verify reviewers. In other words, these ghost reviews,
Sure.
or these negative ghost reviews where they're gaslighting somebody. There are companies out there that help with verifying
Sure.
whether or not that it's an accurate, real life person. How they do that, I don't know.
Right.
But I've read about them, I've seen them, and I haven't utilized them. So, interestingly, though, if you can show, I guess this is a really interesting situation where you can go to the social media outlet and ask that the post be removed because it is basically a ghost review,
Right.
Or and ask them to investigate this to see if it's an actual real profile. Maybe someone just created a fake profile and is
Right.
doing exactly what you're saying.
Yeah, and I think the kind of the overall theme or discussion that we've come to is it's really important for practices to have policies and procedures in place. I know they probably don't want to hear that, and that's boring, and they're thinking, oh well, the lawyers are just kind of looking to give us more red tape or more work to do. But it's really important, I think, to protect the practice in the long run. And if they have a set of rules that show, okay, we're gonna post videos on Facebook, but we're gonna check these things. The computers in the background are locked. The filing cabinets are closed.
That's from a HIPAA standpoint.
There's no patients in the hallway. Like, there's reasons why we're putting these in place. And I know it's a pain, but it's really important because you don't want to get that phone call from OCR saying, hey, we've got a complaint because Conrad, there's a video on your Facebook page and it shows Conrad leaving an exam room and he didn't want anybody to know that he was there. Something as innocuous as that, could cause issues for your practice. So having these kind of boundaries in place, I think is the advice that I always like to give practices.
What about content? Okay, that's the next. That's not just. I'm not talking about PHI, Rory.
Right.
I'm not talking about information about a patient. I'm talking about just general content.
Well, so in other words, the malpractice expert. Let's talk about let's talk about that.
Well, let me ask you this. Say the content. Let me throw the ball in your court for a second. Let me see what you think about this. So, if the content, for example, is offensive,
yep,
could be characterized as discriminatory, racist, or whatever, that the content itself offends someone. How do you talk to providers about that? Have you ever had that question come up to you before?
I've had it come up to me before on the aspect of employees. And I think I would venture to say most businesses have run across this before. I've had it come up to me before where I've received a call from a practice administrator who said one of my employees made essentially like a selfie video, like themselves, like essentially I think it was a TikTok of them saying some very offensive things, and they happened to be wearing the scrubs from work that day, and it had our very distinguishable logo and our entity name on the scrubs in the video that she's making. That was very the video was just discriminatory. Now, it was on her page, her private page, so only her friends could see it. But of course, one of her friends also works here and shared it with me. And so, we had to look at that, and you skate this line between, okay, are we going to talk about First Amendment freedom of speech versus you're an employee and you're wearing your company's clothes? Are you doing this, even if you're not doing it on company time, just the kind of what we talked about earlier in the show, just the common sense of you're a reputation of the company that you work for. I know this was instilled on me at the high school I went to. I know it was instilled on you at the high school that you went to. Right. If you're in that uniform, you better be sure to act correct, because there's no telling who's around you, and you're an extension of that entity. And so I think that's the issue that comes into effect. And ultimately, they reprimanded this employee, put it in her note, and explained to her, look, if you're going to do this kind of stuff, it's hard to regulate that with the whole freedom of speech issue that comes into it, but you can't be doing it wearing our scrubs, and you can't be. Please hone this in, because you're getting really close to doing something, and it ended up having this practice rewrite their policies and procedures and add a little bit more teeth to it, to where if something like this happened outside the scope of their work, that they were able, that was now a fireable offense.
Well, let me ask you this. I mean, you've seen this in employee handbooks, and you've seen this in employment agreements, I'm sure.
Yes.
Even independent contractor agreements, a termination provision that basically says you will be terminated for cause should you violate any policy or procedure, or,
anything that in
moral turpitude or moral indignity, or and that's so broad.
It is, and it's good and bad when it's broad,
right?
And in our case, in this instance, our client, the practice.
Let me ask you this: is that a terminable offense?
I think you can make the argument that
on a private side. So in other words, not a federal, not a state or federal employee. I'm a private employer. I have a contract with an employee, and in that contract it says I can terminate for cause should you do anything that would be considered morally wrong, anything like that. Some very broad like that. What do you think?
I think it depends on, and I know the non-attorneys are going to hate to hear this, I think it depends on the situation and the circumstances that are involved. In the one that I'm talking about, what she was saying, yes, I think she would not want that to be put in front of a judge or obviously a jury or in any sort of discovery, this video that she made. I think that it's on a case-by-case basis. So I think you really have to evaluate it. You've got to look at the character of the employee, kind of look at the totality of it and really decide, okay, are we going to give her a warning and a little bit of education and say, if you do this again, you're gone, or make it immediately? What she said was not appropriate. They decided to give her another chance in this point, but add more teeth to their policies and procedures, and they added in there we worked with them on adding in there a whole social media thing saying, look, even if you do this on your public time, if you do it in social media, and I think this kind of loops back to our overall theme today is, I would make the argument that social media is really not private. I mean, it's available to everybody, and pretty much, unless you've got it really locked down. And so we added in there some provision saying if you do something that's on social media and we find out about it, that's fair game. That's almost as if you did it when you were in the building.
No, I agree. And one thing, interestingly, when I talk to residents, right,
Mm-hmm.
and I talk to them about they're about to leave residency and enter real world,
Sure.
and even young lawyers, because when I teach at law school, I mean, I talk. This is a similar path I'm going here, and it's you are now watched like Big Brother. I mean, everyone. If you look at me and tell me that no hospital or no group practice or no law firm or whatever business you're going into, that they don't do social media investigations on you before they hire you, you're dead wrong.
Absolutely.
So if you're out there, right, on Bourbon Street, flagellate, whatever you're doing, that, on top of the cat's meow deck and doing whatever you're doing, and having fun and maybe getting a little loosey-goosey, but yet you're applying to a place that's, has a no alcohol policy in a very, very religious area that might find that very offensive, you might not get hired.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And you have to be prepared for that, for them to find that kind of stuff.
Remember the doctor that got stuck in the, was it the Uber driver in Florida or New York or someplace? I can't remember.
Yes,
remember that? It made national news.
Yes.
She got out screaming, yelling, and all acted, I mean, I thought, and maybe I don't know, but I have to assume that affected her professional career.
What's interesting that you brought up about the residents leaving school is I've seen for the first time on this side, I was representing an employee, and in her employment application, there was a section where she had to fill in her Facebook handle, her Instagram handle, her Twitter handle. They wanted to know all of it, and it was basically like it was kind of in that beginning section: what's your name, your address, your social. They wanted to know all that, and that was part of their application because they're going to go check that stuff, and they want to see what's on there because you're an extension of that entity.
See, I know I've heard of people who go and now they make their incognito profile.
Sure. Right? They'll change their names or put their middle name or something. Like,
or even something totally different.
Sure. Well, until they're credentialed and they're in, and then they're fine with that. One thing I wanted to do briefly is I wanted to throw it back to you. You talked about content, and since you're the malpractice expert, I want to ask you about that. So, have you heard any concerns, or let's say a doctor, says, hey, I want to post a little video of what it would look like to do this procedure or talk about this procedure. Are there concerns for them posting that online or showing, because then is someone going to find that video, or is it going to come up in a deposition and say, well, Dr. Conrad, on Facebook, you said you would have used this scalpel and this screw and this retractor, but in your notes on the surgery on Mr. Bellina, you didn't do that. So why didn't you? You said on Facebook that this was the best practice and you didn't do it for him. I mean, what are the concerns with kind of putting, because that video is going to live out there forever.
It will.
What are the concerns with having very technical procedures or medical answers? I know I see it very limited, but I kind of think that doctors are a little bit timid or afraid to give medical advice on social media because it's going to come back and bite them in a malpractice issue if they go against it 10 years down the road.
Well, every malpractice case, we do a social media investigation.
Okay.
It just depends,
Sure.
especially on the experts on the other side, since I do defense work. But to answer the question, if you go on YouTube today, there are hundreds and thousands of videos of procedures. So to the first part, can you put a video of a procedure online? It's already there.
Right.
So usually those physicians require the patients to sign releases of information so they can post the video. So that's not uncommon.
Okay.
To your point about Mr. Bellina's surgery, right? Your hypothetical surgery where I went. The issue, the way I would respond to that, I say it depends, because if that video was made maybe 2 or 3 years ago, maybe they're better screws now. Maybe they're better techniques. Maybe they're better tools. So it depends on the date. So in other words, if the nexus of your surgery is close to that close proximity to the date of that video,
sure,
I think you have a better argument to say, well, wait a minute, your video was 3 or 4 months, 5, 6 months ago, and you said this was the screws we need, this is the way to do it, yet it just never happened. Whereas if it's 3, 4, 5, 6 years from now, I think you can arguably say, well, wait a minute, medicine changes so fast. Now instead of regular stainless steel screws, we have titanium screws. We got this, we got all new equipment. So I think you have to put it in context based on the date of the video. And I want to tell you this, each patient is different. If every patient was the same, if every thing was the same, medicine is not like that. Medicine is an art. Why? Because everything changes into so many variables.
Sure.
So I don't think you can cookie cut things and say, hey, every time this happens, you're going to do X. I think you do it in some areas.
Sure.
But I think there needs to be some variables, and I would argue the variable.
And that's a good point, because I've seen, and I've had it sent to me before, a simple video that someone, it's coming to mind now. It was a practice where they wanted to post a video of just how to do a simple splint. If you're out hiking and you sprain your ankle, how to do it. And they made the video and they had posted it. And they had posted it and it had gotten reshared to like an outdoor hiking type
so it
social media. It was really good for the practice. It got him great exposure. However, in the comments, people start making, no, that's incorrect. It's too tight here. It's too tight there. Those are some of the pitfalls that I think practices will see, because then you have the doctor worried, well, am I giving medical advice? Is this considered medical advice? Is there any patient relationship? All these questions come up. Do I have a liability concern? What do you say to someone like that just wants to make an informative video, post it online, but you're concerned about people nitpicking you or something like that?
I get this question a lot about blogs. Right,
sure.
V-blogs, regular blogs, and even social media policy. So one thing we put on is a disclaimer. This is not a physician-patient relationship. This is just educational. It's not advice that it's not advice directed to one patient. So there's no physician-patient relationship. There's been no review of systems, no history, no physical, whatever it is.
Right.
So we don't do that.
Okay.
We put a disclaimer on there, but then also I think in the video the provider can say that, hey, look, this is not establishing a physician-patient relationship. This is for educational purposes only.
Okay.
And, state that on the video or have the disclaimer in the video, and that's it. I think you're fine.
So I think the overall kind of theme that we've reached today is it's okay to have social media pages. It's okay to post content.
I think it's a necessity.
I think so.
I don't think it's just okay. I think you have to do it
in this competitive market where
there's no choice.
The big thing right now is choice, and I know we've talked about it before, and we have an upcoming episode talking about price transparency, especially in 2022 when a lot of these new changes go into effect.
Right.
Everyone wants to compare everyone, and if you have 4.5 stars and the other doctor has 4 stars and y'all are pretty close in price or proximity to where I am, I think that the social media aspect is just, like you said, it's almost required now.
The problem is, though, and I will tell you this, and I know we kind of have to wrap up, but I want to tell you this. When you have health grades or any kind of review site, doesn't matter what it is.
Sure.
I mean, the one I see all the time is health grades. And it could be, I know they have a lot more. It's not just that. You have to ask yourself, how are the reviews being received?
Right.
How are they actually calculated? And it's hard because, for example, medical malpractice suits are public, but peer review data on every provider in the country is confidential. So in other words, you might have a patient who literally has a great patient experience. Oh, I think this doctor's nice and sweet.
Right.
Oh, he's great, or she's great. And they're giving him positive reviews, and people are relying on that.
Right.
But that doctor might have 10 malpractice suits.
Right.
Or be reported for suspension, and nobody would ever know that.
That's a great point. That really
Nobody
is.
would know that.
And so many people are relying on those stars on Google.
Right.
Or
So
health grades.
do we have some detrimental reliance going on here, or some misplaced reliance? And so the public needs to understand that.
That's a really good point.
So I mean, I think that's something we're going to talk about in another podcast on peer review and review sites and social media, because I think that's going to be an episode in and of itself.
And like you said, at this point, I'll agree with you on that. It's almost a requirement that if your practice wants to continue growing and kind of keep up with the current trends, you've got to have the pages. Kind of my take-home advice is you need to have a guard keeper. You need to have some policies in place to make sure that before the post is made,
and everyone needs to know about it.
Right, exactly. And then secondly, I would advise all practices to have some sort of social media policy in place for their employees, so those issues don't go on when the employee is on their lunch break wearing their scrubs or on their way home posting a video.
Spot question.
Oh boy.
Ready? You're a physician. You have a physician client call you and say, "Oh, by the way, on my Facebook page, one of my patients just friended me. Do I accept? Yes or no?" Ha ha. I got you. See, yes or no? Would you recommend that they friend the patient?
I honestly don't have that much of an issue with it if the patient's requesting to be the friend of the provider. I don't have a huge issue with it. Now you get into that lines of, as the physicians aren't supposed to date their patients, and that's kind of more of a state issue or state by state issue. I don't have a huge issue with it, but it's going to come into play of is this patient going to find out things about you or see things or posts that you make that, is it going to taint this provider-patient relationship?
You and I would differ on this. I would say absolutely not.
Okay.
No way.
Okay.
If you want to friend
now,
someone,
it depends.
If you want to friend someone, friend the group practice.
Let me backtrack a second. Are you friends with this patient, or is it just because you saw them one time for a toenail or something?
Maybe I should add more facts to this. Okay, so you don't know the patient. You didn't go to high school, college.
Sure.
You don't run in the same crowds. Literally, the only connection you have with the patient is that they came to see you for professional medical services.
Yeah. So, all right. Well, I'm going to go back on my answer under those facts and say I think
you want to reset.
We're going to scrub this and we'll re-record my answer this way. I think that in that situation, I would say no is probably not, because you're
opening yourself up.
Yeah, I think so. And now, if it's something different, where it's like you mentioned, it's a friend, or you've been going and seeing this guy for 5 years, and you've got common interests, I think that's okay, because that's really more of a friend in the true sense, a friend request. But
let me ask you this: one thing that I've told doctors to do, and I don't know if you've done this, is I tell doctors, make a professional Facebook page.
Yeah.
And have your personal Facebook page.
Yeah.
So if they want to follow you professionally, I don't have a problem with that.
Sure.
However, on your personal Facebook page, absolutely not.
Yeah. Yeah.
Or the group practice.
And I think it becomes hard. Right? Well, I'm going to give you an on-the-spot question. What do you do if, you're already friends with the person and then they switch over to come see you now? Are you going to go defriend them?
No. I'm not going to do that. Why? Because I had a previous existing relationship with them prior to me seeing them in a professional capacity. So I think that changes the fact scenario. If I know someone, was friends with someone, had a friendship with them prior to me seeing them professionally, then I don't think it's a problem.
Sure.
I mean, I got plenty of friends on my Facebook page that are doctors that I've seen.
Right.
So I don't see that's an issue.
Okay. Well, overall, I think that the takeaway is having a plan in place, having that gatekeeper. You've got to have the pages now, but there are some hiccups and some missteps that you can make. It's really important to just keep all those in mind. And if you have questions, I know I've done them before. I know you've done them. Yeah. We've got the policies and procedures to kind of help based on your practice. So.
I agree. And look, we're gonna wrap this up. We're gonna be doing a few more parts to this type of topic on our podcast and subsequent podcasts. We're going to be talking about maybe some in-depth details on the policies. We're going to go into defamation cases, looking at how to respond.
Peer review.
Absolutely talk about peer review. So we hope all of you stick around for those episodes coming up shortly. We thank you very much for joining us this morning on our podcast here at CSW. We look forward to having you back for future podcasts. Please make sure you hit the subscribe button and email Rory. What's your email?
rbellina@shahardi.com.
And cm@shahardi.com. We look forward to hearing from you soon.
Thank you.
And have a great weekend, folks.
Thank you for listening to Health Law Talk presented by Shahardi Sherman Williams. For more information or to contact us, please visit our website linked in the description below. Also, please be sure to subscribe to our podcast and follow us on Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, and YouTube linked in the description below. Thank you for listening.